Captain Lee Taeho stood on the bridge of the UES Persistence and watched the massive energy wall that blocked their path through space. The barrier stretched in all directions as far as their sensors could reach. It looked like a giant curtain, made of blue and silver light, that moved and twisted in patterns no human could understand. For 300 years, this wall had stopped humanity from exploring the center of their galaxy. Today, that would change. Dr. Park Seo-jin walked up to Lee with a datapad in her hands. Her face showed both excitement and worry. She had spent 15 years working on the problem of how to get past the barrier. Every test they had tried failed. Every probe they sent was destroyed or simply vanished. But 3 months ago, her team had discovered something new. They found that quantum energy could be twisted in a special way that might let them pass through solid objects. Kim Dong-woo was the engineer who built the new drive system. He was young for such an important job, but his mind worked differently than other people. While most engineers thought about how to push ships through space faster, Kim thought about how to make space itself bend around the ship. His quantum resonance drive did not move the ship at all. Instead, it moved reality around the ship. Choi Hye-jin sat at the navigation station and checked their position for the 100th time that day. She had plotted the safest course to the barrier and calculated exactly where they needed to emerge on the other side. Her hands moved quickly over the controls as she made tiny adjustments to their approach. The math had to be perfect, or they might appear inside a star or asteroid. Yoon Jae-sung monitored all communications from his post. Earth Command wanted constant updates on their progress. The governments of Earth had argued for 2 years about whether this mission was too dangerous. Some said they should wait and study the barrier more. Others said humanity needed to know what was on the other side. In the end, curiosity won, as it always did with humans. The crew of 200 people came from every nation on Earth. Scientists wanted to study new worlds and new forms of life. Engineers wanted to see what amazing technology might exist beyond the barrier. Military officers came to protect the ship and make first contact with any aliens they might meet. Diplomats prepared for the possibility that they would need to negotiate with beings more advanced than humans. Lee pressed the comm button to speak to the entire ship. His voice carried to every deck and every room where people worked or waited. He told them they were about to make history. He said their children would remember this day as the moment humanity joined the larger community of space. He did not mention his private worry that they might not survive the next hour. Dr. Park had explained the risks many times. The barrier was not just energy. It was something that changed the basic rules of how matter and space worked. Their drive might not be strong enough to push through. The ship might be torn apart by forces they did not understand. They might emerge somewhere completely different than they planned. Worst of all, they might damage the barrier itself and cause problems they could not imagine. Kim stood in the engine room and watched displays that showed the power building in the quantum cores. The resonance drive drew energy from the space between atoms. It used that energy to create a bubble around the ship where normal physics did not apply. Inside the bubble, the ship existed in several dimensions at once. This let it pass through barriers that would stop normal matter. The engineer had tested the drive on small objects first. They sent metal rods through solid walls. They pushed robot probes through sheets of pure energy. Every test worked, but Kim knew scaling up the effect was dangerous. The bigger the object, the more energy was needed. The more energy they used, the more unstable space became around them. Choi announced they had reached the proper distance from the barrier. Lee ordered all departments to report their readiness. One by one, the section chiefs confirmed they were prepared. Dr. Park checked that all scientific instruments were recording. Bae Min-ho, the security chief, made sure all weapons were powered down so they would not appear threatening to anyone watching from the other side. Lee gave the order to begin. Kim activated the quantum resonance drive and space around the Persistence began to change. The stars outside the windows started to bend and stretch. Colors that had no names appeared in the darkness. The ship itself seemed to become transparent. As it existed in multiple places at the same time, the barrier grew larger as they approached. Up close, it was even more beautiful and terrifying than from a distance. Waves of energy moved through it like ocean currents. Some parts were bright enough to blind a person, while others were so dark they seemed to absorb light itself. Strange. Shapes moved within the energy that might have been patterns or might have been living things. As the ship touched the barrier, everything changed. Alarms started ringing throughout the Persistence. The lights flickered, and the artificial gravity wavered. Kim shouted that the quantum field was becoming unstable. The barrier was fighting back against their attempt to pass through it. Energy. Readings spiked beyond what their instruments could measure. Dr. Park watched her sensors in amazement and terror. The barrier was not just a wall. It was alive in some way. It was examining their ship and trying to understand what they were. She could see patterns in the energy that looked almost like thoughts. The barrier was deciding whether to let them pass or destroy them. Lee felt the ship shake as forces pulled it in different directions. Through the windows, he could see pieces of the Persistence that existed in other dimensions. Some parts of the ship were already on the other side of the barrier, while other parts were still approaching it. He ordered Kim to increase power, but the engineer warned that too much energy might tear them apart. For 10 minutes, that felt like hours, the ship fought its way through the barrier. Systems failed and came back online. People felt sick as gravity changed direction randomly. The air itself seemed to vibrate with energy that made their teeth ache. Some crew members reported seeing strange visions of places that might exist in other dimensions. Then suddenly, they were through. The shaking stopped, and the alarms went quiet. Outside the windows, they saw a completely different view of space. Instead of the few scattered stars they knew from human space, they saw thousands of lights arranged in perfect geometric patterns. Massive structures surrounded entire stars. Some were rings, while others looked like giant flowers or crystals. Choi quickly checked their position and confirmed they had emerged exactly where she had planned. The navigation systems showed they were now in the central region of the galaxy, where the oldest and most advanced civilizations should live. Dr. Park began scanning for signs of life and technology. Her instruments immediately detected artificial signals coming from hundreds of different sources. But something was wrong. As they celebrated their success, Kim noticed a problem with the quantum wake left by their passage through the barrier. The hole they had made was not closing properly. Energy was leaking through in both directions. Worse, the resonance effect was growing stronger instead of fading away. Dr. Park realized what was happening. Their breakthrough had sent a pulse of quantum energy racing outward in all directions. Any civilization with advanced sensors would detect it immediately. They had not just entered the galactic core quietly. They had announced their arrival to everyone who lived there. The energy pulse was like a signal flare that said humans had finally learned to break through barriers that were supposed to be permanent. It told every alien race that a new species had joined them. But as they would soon learn, it also told them that something that was supposed to stay locked away might now be free to escape. The space around the Persistence was unlike anything humans had ever imagined. Massive rings of metal and crystal surrounded nearby stars like jewelry worn by giants. Each ring was wide enough to fit Earth's entire orbit inside it. Platforms, the size of moons, floated in perfect formations, connected by beams of pure light. Dr. Park tried to count the artificial structures her sensors detected, but gave up when the number reached 10,000. Bai Min-ho studied the readings from his security station with growing amazement and concern. Every structure was clearly built by intelligent beings, but the technology was so advanced he could not guess how any of it worked. Some platforms seemed to be made of solid energy, while others appeared to exist in several dimensions at once. A few structures were moving, but not in any way that followed normal physics. 3 hours after their arrival, the first alien ship appeared. It simply materialized near them without any warning from their sensors. The vessel was beautiful and strange, with a hull that looked like it was carved from a single piece of dark crystal. It had no obvious engines or weapons, but energy patterns flowed across its surface like living things. The ship was twice as long as the Persistence, but seemed to have no mass at all. Yoon received the first alien communication 30 seconds later. His equipment detected signals coming from the crystal ship, but they were not radio waves or any other form of energy humans understood. The signals seemed to appear directly in the communication computers without traveling through space at all. When the translation program finally decoded the message, it was simple and direct. The aliens identified themselves as representatives of the Veltar species. They served as peacekeepers for something called the hegemony, which governed the central regions of the galaxy. The message was polite, but firm. They wanted to know who the humans were and how they had passed through the Great Barrier. They requested permission to come aboard and speak with the human leaders. Lee called an emergency meeting of his senior officers. Dr. Park insisted they should invite the aliens aboard immediately. This was the greatest moment in human history, and they needed to learn everything they could. They disagreed and argued they should be more careful. They knew nothing about alien intentions or capabilities. The security chief wanted to meet in space where both sides would be on equal ground. After much discussion, Lee decided to invite a small group of Veltar representatives to the ship. He ordered Bay to have security teams ready but told them to keep their weapons hidden. First contact needed to show that humans were peaceful but not helpless. Dr. Lim Yun-seo prepared her equipment to study alien biology, while Han Yu-jin reviewed every protocol for diplomatic meetings. The aliens arrived, in a small craft that passed through the Persistence's hull without opening any doors. 3 Veltar materialized on the shuttle deck in columns of soft blue light. They were tall and thin, with skin that looked like polished stone. Their faces had features humans could recognize as eyes and mouths, but everything was arranged differently. They wore robes that seemed to be made of liquid metal that flowed and changed color as they moved. The lead Veltar introduced himself with a name that sounded like music when translated by their equipment. He explained that his people had been watching the barrier for millions of years, waiting for something to break through from the outside. No species had ever accomplished this before. They needed to understand how humans had done the impossible. Dr. Park described their quantum resonance drive and the years of research that led to its development. The Veltar listened carefully and asked detailed questions that showed they understood the science involved. Their own technology was based on completely different principles that involved manipulating space and time directly. They found human engineering to be crude but surprisingly effective. The aliens explained that the hegemony included dozens of ancient civilizations that had evolved far beyond their original biological forms. Some species existed as pure energy, while others had become collective minds that shared thoughts across entire star systems. Each race contributed different abilities and knowledge to maintain peace and order in the galactic core. Dr. Lim made careful observations of Veltar biology and found it fascinating. Their bodies seemed to be partially made of crystalline structures that could store and process information like living computers. They could communicate through direct energy transfer as well as spoken language. Most surprisingly, they appeared to be immortal, with some individuals being millions of years old. The Veltar representative explained that the Great Barrier served 2 purposes. It protected younger civilizations from being overwhelmed by advanced technology they were not ready to understand. It also contained something dangerous that had threatened all life in the galaxy long ago. By breaking through the barrier, humans had upset a careful balance that had been maintained for eons. When Han asked what was being contained, the aliens became more serious. They spoke of ancient entities called the Devourers that consumed matter and energy at the quantum level. These beings did not just destroy things they encountered. They completely erased them from existence, leaving behind empty spaces where even the basic forces of physics stopped working. The barrier had been built to keep them trapped in a prison that spanned the outer rim of the galaxy. Dr. Park felt a chill of fear as she realized what this meant. The quantum wake left by their passage through the barrier was still growing stronger. If it continued to expand, it might damage the prison that held the Devourers. Their breakthrough might have accidentally started a process that could free the most dangerous enemies the galaxy had ever known. The Veltar confirmed her worst fears. Their sensors had detected unusual quantum disturbances spreading outward from the point where humans had crossed the barrier. Ancient warning systems were activating across the galaxy as automated defenses prepared for a possible Devourer escape. The situation was becoming critical and needed immediate attention from the highest levels of the hegemony. Lee asked what could be done to stop the process they had started. The aliens explained that human technology might actually be part of the solution. Because their quantum drive worked differently than standard hegemony systems, it might be able to interact with the barrier in ways that could repair the damage. but this would require cooperation between human engineers and alien scientists who had never worked together before. The Veltar invited the Persistents to accompany them to the Nexus, which was the central government station of the hegemony. There, human representatives could meet with leaders from all the major civilizations and discuss how to handle the crisis. The journey would take several days, even with alien technology to guide them through hyperspace corridors. Kim worked frantically in the engine room to understand how their quantum drive had caused such unexpected effects. The math involved was beyond anything humans had studied before. The resonance frequencies that allowed them to pass through the barrier had created harmonics that were still spreading through dimensional space. These vibrations were weakening the quantum locks that held the Devourers in their prison. Medical. Officer Seo Kyung-mi made an incredible discovery while studying biological samples the Veltar had provided. Human DNA contained natural resistance to certain types of quantum radiation that would be fatal to most other species. This resistance was why humans could develop technology that worked differently than alien systems. It also meant they might be naturally immune to some of the effects that made the Devourers so dangerous. As the Persistents followed the Veltar ship toward the Nexus, Dr. Park monitored the spreading quantum disturbances with growing alarm. The distortions were reaching areas of space that had been empty for millions of years. Ancient automated systems were coming online and sending warning signals in languages that predated most current civilizations. Something that had been sleeping was beginning to wake up. The journey to the Nexus took them past wonders that challenged everything humans thought they knew about what was possible. They saw stars that had been moved from their original positions to create perfect geometric patterns. Entire solar systems had been converted into massive computers that calculated solutions to problems spanning galactic distances. Ships larger than planets traveled between dimensions carrying cargo that existed in several realities at once. But among all these marvels, the crew noticed something troubling. Many areas of space showed signs of ancient damage that had never been repaired. Sections of stars were simply missing, leaving behind wounds in reality that hurt to look at directly. The Veltar explained these were scars left by the last war against the Devourers. Some wounds in space could never heal because the entities had erased the very concept of matter existing in those locations. As they approached, the Nexus Yun detected massive communication networks carrying urgent messages between distant civilizations. The alien languages were too complex for their translation systems to decode completely, but the emotional content was clear. Fear was spreading through the galaxy as beings that had lived in peace for millions of years prepared for the possibility of war against an enemy they had hoped never to face again. Lee stood on the bridge and watched the Nexus grow larger on their view screen. The Nexus station was beyond anything the human crew could have imagined. Sections of it existed in normal space while other parts phased in and out of dimensions they could not see. Ships from hundreds of different species docked at platforms that seemed to grow from the station's surface to accommodate each vessel perfectly. The Persistents looked tiny compared to most other ships, but the aliens treated them with respect that surprised everyone aboard. Oh Sang-wook monitored the ship's systems as they approached their assigned docking port. His engineering sensors detected energy readings that made no sense according to human science. The station generated more power than Earth's sun, but he could not locate the source. Gravity flowed in patterns that allowed beings to walk on any surface they chose. Time itself moved differently in various sections of the station. The Prime. Synthesis was the leader of the hegemony, and it agreed to meet with the human representatives immediately. Lee selected Dr. Park and Han to accompany him to the meeting. Bay wanted to send security personnel, but the aliens assured them that violence was impossible within the Nexus. The station's systems prevented any form of conflict by suppressing aggressive thoughts and neutralizing weapons automatically. The chamber where they met the Prime synthesis challenged their understanding of what a living being could be. The entity appeared as a shifting pattern of light and energy that sometimes took recognizable shapes and sometimes existed as pure mathematics. It communicated through direct thought transfer that felt like having someone else's ideas appear in their minds. The experience was disturbing, but not painful. Through this mental connection, the Prime synthesis shared the history of the Devourers with the humans. These entities had appeared millions of years ago from somewhere outside the galaxy. They did not destroy matter in any normal way. Instead, they consumed the quantum information that defined how matter could exist. Anything they touched was not just killed or broken apart, but completely removed from reality. The first civilizations to encounter devourers had tried to fight them with conventional weapons and failed completely. Energy beams passed through, the entities without effect. Nuclear explosions were absorbed and converted into more devourers. Even antimatter weapons only made them stronger. The entities seemed to exist partially outside normal space, where the rules of physics that governed matter and energy did not apply to them. Dr. Park asked how the ancient civilizations had finally defeated such impossible enemies. The Prime Synthesis explained they had never truly defeated the Devourers. Instead, they had found a way to trap them in a prison that existed between dimensions. The Great Barrier was not just a wall, but the visible part of a massive containment system that kept the entities locked away from normal space. Building the prison had required sacrifices that haunted the galaxy even now. Entire species had volunteered to transform themselves into living components of the containment system. They gave up their physical forms and became part of the barrier itself. Their consciousness still existed within the prison walls, where they maintained constant vigilance against any attempt by the Devourers to escape. The quantum disturbances caused by the human breakthrough were weakening this ancient prison. Automated sensors throughout the galaxy were detecting the first signs that some Devourers might be finding ways to test the barriers that held them. If even one entity escaped, it could consume entire star systems before spreading to threaten every form of life in the galaxy. As they discussed the crisis, Kang Woo-jin was analyzing defensive capabilities throughout the galactic core. His tactical assessment was disturbing. The hegemony had not fought a real war in millions of years. Their weapons were designed for maintaining peace between civilized species, not for destroying entities that existed outside normal reality. Most of their military technology would be useless against Devourers. The Prime Synthesis shared detailed records of the last war against the entities. Kang studied battle reports from conflicts that had occurred before humans even existed as a species. Every conventional tactic had failed. Entire fleets had simply vanished when they encountered the Devourers. Planets protected by energy shields that could stop supernovas were consumed as if the shields were not there at all. But hidden in the ancient records, Kang found something interesting. A few weapons had shown limited effectiveness against the entities. These were crude devices that worked by manipulating matter directly instead of using advanced energy manipulation. Kinetic weapons that simply threw heavy objects at high speed sometimes disrupted Devourer cohesion. Nuclear explosives occasionally forced them to retreat if detonated at exactly the right distance. Ryu Ji-won studied these historical weapon reports with growing excitement. The successful weapons all shared one characteristic. They were primitive by galactic standards. They worked by affecting normal matter and energy instead of manipulating quantum fields or dimensional space. This was exactly the type of technology that humans excelled at building. Dr. Park realized why human technology might be effective against Devourers when advanced alien systems failed. Human weapons worked entirely within normal space, using basic physical principles. The entities might be immune to quantum manipulation and energy projection, but they still had to interact with normal matter when they consumed it. Crude kinetic weapons might actually be able to hurt them. Kim began immediate work on modifying human weapon systems to be more effective against targets that existed partially outside normal space. The ship's missile systems could be upgraded to carry warheads, designed specifically to disrupt quantum cohesion. Their railguns might be able to fire projectiles that would force Devourers back into normal space where they could be damaged. While the humans worked on weapons upgrades, the first confirmed Devourer breach occurred in a distant sector of the galaxy. Automated monitoring stations detected a zone of absolute darkness that was expanding slowly but steadily. Everything within the zone had simply stopped existing. Stars disappeared, leaving behind empty spaces where even light could not travel. The Prime Synthesis immediately dispatched a hegemony fleet to contain the breach. The humans requested permission to accompany the fleet and test their modified weapons. Many alien commanders objected to bringing such a primitive ship into battle against the galaxy's most dangerous enemy, but the Prime Synthesis overruled their concerns and ordered the Persistence to join the response force. The journey to the breach site took 2 days through hyperspace corridors that bent space and time around the fleet. O monitored their engines carefully as they traveled through regions where normal physics did not apply reliably. The quantum drive that had caused so much trouble was now their greatest asset. It allowed them to remain stable in areas where other ships had to constantly adjust their dimensional phase. When they arrived at the breach site, the scope of the threat became clear. An entire star system was in the process of being erased from existence. 3 planets had already vanished completely. The star itself was flickering as parts of it were consumed by something that could not be seen directly. Ships that flew too close to the affected area simply disappeared without any distress signals or debris. The hegemony fleet deployed in a careful formation designed to contain the breach without getting close enough to be consumed. Their sensors could detect the devourer, but could not get clear readings on its size or exact location. It appeared as a void in space that seemed to absorb sensor signals along with everything else it touched. Admiral Velkarn commanded the alien fleet from a ship that existed in several dimensions simultaneously. She coordinated the attack through quantum communication links that connected the minds of all fleet commanders. The aliens planned to use their most powerful energy weapons to try to force the devourer back into the dimensional prison. Lee positioned the Persistence at what the aliens considered a safe distance and prepared to provide fire support with their modified weapons. Bay had armed every missile with special warheads designed to disrupt quantum fields. The railguns were loaded with projectiles made from the densest materials they could synthesize. Every weapon system on the ship was targeted at the center of the expanding darkness. The hegemony fleet opened fire first with weapons that could vaporize planets. Beams of pure energy that contained more power than entire stars struck the area where the devourer was located. For a moment, the attack seemed successful as the expansion of the dark zone slowed. But then the energy beams began to bend and twist as they were absorbed into the entity. Within minutes, the most powerful weapons in the hegemony arsenal were feeding energy directly to their target. The devourer grew larger and stronger with each attack. Ships that had seemed invulnerable began to flicker as the entity reached out through quantum space to consume them. Admiral Velkarn ordered an immediate retreat, but several vessels had already begun to fade from existence. Lee gave the order to fire every weapon the Persistence carried. Missiles streaked across space carrying warheads that had never been tested in real combat. Railgun projectiles accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. Nuclear explosives detonated in carefully calculated patterns around the edge of the dark zone. The effect was immediate and shocking, and the news of humanity's success against the devourer spread through the hegemony faster than light itself. For millions of years, the ancient civilizations had believed their enemy was completely invulnerable. Now, a species that had only reached space travel a few centuries ago had proven that the entities could be hurt. The implications changed everything about how the galaxy would face the growing crisis. Shin A-Ra led a joint research team that included the greatest minds from dozens of different species. Working together, they studied exactly why human weapons had been effective when advanced alien technology failed. The answer lay in the fundamental differences between how primitive and advanced civilizations approached the manipulation of matter and energy. The hegemony species had evolved beyond the need for crude physical weapons. Their technology worked by manipulating quantum fields, space-time, and dimensional barriers. These advanced methods were precisely what made their weapons useless against devourers. The entities existed partially outside normal reality, where such sophisticated techniques could not reach them. Human weapons worked because they were simple. Missiles carried explosive chemicals that released energy through basic atomic reactions. Railguns used magnetic fields to accelerate solid projectiles to high speeds. Nuclear weapons split atoms through processes that had been understood for centuries. All of these systems operated entirely within normal space, using principles that applied even to beings that existed across multiple dimensions. Dr. Park worked with alien scientists to understand exactly how devourers interacted with normal matter. The entities were like tears in reality that consumed the quantum information defining how matter could exist. But when they absorbed something, they had to briefly enter normal space to process it. During those moments, they became vulnerable to attacks using conventional physics. The research team discovered that devourers could not completely ignore the basic forces that govern the universe. Gravity still affected them even when they were phased into other dimensions. Strong nuclear forces could disrupt their quantum coherence if applied with enough precision. Electromagnetic fields could sometimes force them back into normal space, where they could be damaged more easily. This knowledge led to the development of new hybrid weapons that combined alien power sources with human design principles. The crystalline architects provided materials that could withstand forces that would vaporize normal matter. The energy shepherds offered power systems that could charge human weapons with energy levels that dwarfed anything Earth could produce. Young Hyon-Su supervised teams of human and alien engineers working together to retrofit hegemony vessels with primitive weapon systems. The process was incredibly difficult because alien ships were designed around completely different principles. Most vessels had no mechanical systems at all. Everything was controlled through thought interfaces or quantum manipulation. Installing simple missile launchers on ships that existed in multiple dimensions required completely new engineering approaches. The weapons had to be built using materials that could exist in normal space, while being mounted on vessels that phased in and out of reality. Power systems designed for energy beings had to be modified to operate crude chemical explosives. The cultural differences between human and alien engineers created constant challenges. Species that had not used physical tools for millions of years had to relearn basic concepts like mechanical stress and thermal expansion. Humans had to work with beings whose minds operated at speeds that made conversations feel like geological processes. Kim Soo-young documented these interactions. While trying to maintain her sanity in the face of incomprehensible alien perspectives, she met beings that existed as collective consciousness spanning multiple bodies. Others had transcended individual existence entirely and communicated through quantum entanglement of their thoughts. Some species experienced time as a navigable dimension rather than a linear progression. The Mindweavers were particularly difficult to work with because they could not understand why humans insisted on maintaining individual thoughts. They offered to merge consciousness with human engineers to improve efficiency, but most people found the experience terrifying. The few who tried it reported that their sense of self became scattered across multiple alien minds. Working with the energy shepherds was like trying to have a conversation with a living star. They existed as pure consciousness within energy fields that could power entire civilizations. They found human concern with material objects amusing, but agreed to help because they understood the threat devourers posed to all forms of life, including energy beings. The crystalline architects were easier to work with because they still maintained physical forms even though their bodies were made of living crystal that could reshape itself at will. They provided materials that were harder than diamond but could be programmed to behave like any substance needed. Their crystal composites could conduct electricity like copper store data, like computer memory, or explode like chemical weapons depending on how they were configured. As the retrofit program continued, new devourer breaches appeared in different parts of the galaxy. Each incident was slightly larger than the last, as the entities learned to exploit weaknesses in their prison. The quantum disturbances from the human breakthrough were still spreading and creating new opportunities for escape. Lee found himself commanding a combined fleet of human and alien vessels that operated under completely different principles. Human ships used mechanical controls and required constant maintenance. Alien vessels responded to mental commands and could repair themselves automatically. Coordinating attacks between such different systems required new tactical doctrines that no one had ever tested in real combat. The first major test came when 3 devourers simultaneously breached containment in the same stellar region. The combined fleet had to split into battle groups to engage multiple enemies at once. This meant human ships would have to operate independently without alien support for the first time since the crisis began. Choi coordinated navigation for the human battle group using skills she had learned commanding simple cargo ships between planets. Now she was plotting courses through regions of space where alien technology bent the normal rules of physics. Stars had been moved from their original positions, and gravity flowed in artificial patterns that could trap unwary ships. The battle was unlike anything in human history. Devourers were not enemies that could be defeated through superior firepower or clever tactics. They were forces of entropy that consumed the very concept of existence. Fighting them required constant movement to avoid being caught in zones where reality was breaking down. Human weapons proved their worth again as modified missiles and railgun projectiles forced the entities to retreat. But each victory came at a cost, as alien allies were erased from existence when they moved too close to the combat zone. The humans found themselves watching entire civilizations disappear and being the only ones who remembered they had ever existed. Bay developed new combat procedures that kept human ships at safe distances while still allowing effective attacks. The key was to use the superior mobility of their quantum drive to strike quickly and retreat before devourers could respond. Hit-and-run tactics that would have been cowardly against normal enemies became essential for survival against beings that could erase ships from reality. The success of these new tactics led to a fundamental change in how the hegemony approached the crisis. Instead of trying to contain individual breaches, they began a systematic campaign to drive all escaped devourers back into their dimensional prison. This required coordinated attacks across dozens of star systems using combined fleets of retrofitted alien ships and human vessels. Ryu worked around the clock to keep human weapon systems operational under the stress of constant combat. The modified weapons were pushing the limits of what human technology could achieve. Missile guidance systems burned out from exposure to quantum distortions. Railgun barrels warped from firing projectiles at relativistic speeds. Nuclear warheads had to be specially shielded to prevent premature detonation in areas where space itself was unstable. But the weapons worked, and that was what mattered. Each successful engagement proved that the devourers could be fought. More importantly, it showed that cooperation between primitive human technology and advanced alien systems could create capabilities that neither side could achieve alone. The campaign to recapture escaped devourers took 3 months and cost the lives of billions of beings from dozens of species. But by the end, every entity that had broken free from the dimensional prison had been driven back into containment. The immediate crisis was over, but everyone knew it was only a temporary victory. Quantum disturbances from the human breakthrough were still spreading through space and weakening the prison walls. More breaches would occur, and each one would be larger than the last. The only permanent solution would be to repair the damage to the containment system itself. But that would require someone to enter the dimensional prison where the devourers were held and work from inside to rebuild the quantum locks. It was a mission that would be virtually impossible to survive. The Nexus had become the center of the greatest engineering project in galactic history. Representatives from every hegemony civilization worked together to design a way to repair the dimensional prison that held the devourers. The solution they developed was elegant in its simplicity and terrible in its cost. Someone would have to enter the prison and manually maintain the quantum locks that kept the entities contained. Lee Jun-ho studied the technical requirements for the mission with growing understanding of what would be required. The person who entered the prison would need to survive in an environment where normal physics broke down randomly. They would have to resist the mental effects of being surrounded by entities that consumed the concept of existence itself. Most importantly, they would need immunity to the quantum radiation that had killed every previous attempt to repair the prison from inside. The Prime synthesis explained that only humans possessed the natural resistance to quantum effects that would allow survival inside the prison. Every other species in the galaxy would be destroyed within minutes of entering the containment field. This biological immunity was why humans had been able to develop technology that could breach the Great Barrier in the first place. Dr. Park confirmed the analysis through extensive testing of human volunteers. The same genetic factors that protected them from certain types of radiation also provided resistance to the reality distortions inside the dimensional prison. A human could potentially survive inside the containment field for years or even decades while maintaining the systems that kept devourers locked away. But the mission would require more than just survival. The quantum locks were incredibly complex, mechanisms that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Operating them required direct neural interface with systems that would gradually change the operator's consciousness. Over time, the person would become less human and more like a living component of the prison itself. Kim studied the technical specifications for the quantum lock controls with fascination and horror. The systems were built by civilizations that had existed millions of years ago using technology that surpassed anything the current hegemony could create. Understanding how to operate them would require someone to merge their consciousness partially with the machine intelligence that ran the prison. The volunteer would retain their basic personality and memories, but their thinking would gradually adapt to perceive reality across multiple dimensions. They would begin to experience time as a navigable dimension rather than a linear progression. Eventually, they would become something beyond human comprehension while still maintaining enough humanity to care about protecting the galaxy. Lee knew he should volunteer for the mission himself. As captain, it was his responsibility to make the greatest sacrifice for the good of his crew and humanity. But Dr. Park argued that the job required someone with deep understanding of both human technology and alien quantum systems. She had worked more closely with the prison technology than anyone else and was the logical choice. Kim disagreed with both of them. He had designed the quantum resonance drive that created this crisis in the first place. It was his responsibility to fix the damage his invention had caused. More importantly, his engineering background gave him the best chance of successfully operating the incredibly complex systems inside the prison. The debate continued for days, while quantum disturbances spread further through space and new devourer breaches appeared in distant sectors. The hegemony fleet was managing to contain each escape, but the attacks were becoming more frequent. The prison was failing faster than anyone had predicted, and time was running out. The decision was made when Kim simply walked into the portal chamber and activated the dimensional gateway before anyone could stop him. He left a message explaining that he could not let others sacrifice themselves for a problem he had created. His last words to the crew were a promise that he would find a way to maintain the prison systems without losing his essential humanity. The gateway transported Kim directly into the heart of the dimensional prison, where reality followed rules that human minds were not designed to understand. Space curved in directions that did not exist in normal dimensions. Time flowed backward and forward simultaneously. Matter existed in states that had no names in any language. The quantum locks were vast mechanisms that stretched across dimensional boundaries invisible to normal perception. They appeared as geometric patterns of pure mathematics that somehow contained physical substance. Operating them required Kim to connect his consciousness directly to control systems that had been running automatically for millions of years. The merger of human and machine intelligence was unlike anything Kim had experienced. His thoughts expanded to encompass calculations involving variables that existed in dozens of dimensions. He could perceive the devourers as tiers in reality that constantly tested the strength of their prison. Every lock had to be monitored simultaneously to prevent any entity from finding a weakness. But maintaining the prison required more than just technical knowledge. The system needed someone who cared about protecting life and preventing the destruction of everything that existed. The original builders had designed the locks to respond to the operators' emotional commitment to their duty. Without genuine dedication to protecting the galaxy, the quantum mechanisms would gradually fail. Kim discovered that previous operators had eventually been consumed by despair at the magnitude of their eternal responsibility. Being surrounded by entities that represented the end of all existence wore down their will to continue fighting. One by one, they had given up and allowed the prison systems to decay until new volunteers had to take their place. The human engineer was determined not to repeat their failure. He focused on memories of Earth and the crew of the Persistence to maintain his connection to humanity. He thought about the alien civilizations he had worked with and their incredible achievements. Most importantly, he remembered that billions of beings were depending on him to keep the devourers contained. The work was exhausting in ways that had no comparison to normal human experience. Kim had to maintain conscious control of systems that operated across 17 dimensions simultaneously. Any moment of inattention could allow a devourer to find a weakness in the quantum locks. Sleep was impossible because the prison required constant monitoring. But Kim adapted to his new existence with typically human stubbornness. He found ways to rest his consciousness by rotating his attention between different sections of the prison. He developed techniques for monitoring multiple dimensional barriers simultaneously without losing focus on any single system. Most importantly, he discovered that his human emotions actually strengthened the quantum locks by providing motivation the original designers had not anticipated. Outside the prison, the galaxy began to recover from the crisis. The Persistence returned to human space carrying news of their incredible journey and the alliance with alien civilizations. Earth was granted full membership in the hegemony and became a crucial defensive outpost protecting the galactic rim from any future threats. Lee found himself commanding the Terra Defense Corps, a new military organization designed to protect reality itself from enemies that existed outside normal space. Human technology revolutionized galactic defense as crude mechanical systems proved essential for maintaining stability in areas where advanced quantum technology failed. Dr. Park became the galaxy's leading expert on quantum containment and established research stations throughout hegemony space. Her work led to new defensive systems that could detect dimensional intrusions before they became serious threats. She never stopped looking for ways to improve the prison systems and reduce the burden on Kim. The hybrid human-alien vessels created during the crisis became the foundation for a new type of exploration ship. These vessels combined primitive human reliability with advanced alien capabilities. They could operate in areas of space where reality was unstable and maintain functionality when normal physics broke down. Choi led expeditions to map regions of space that had been damaged by the ancient war against devourers. Her navigation skills were essential for traveling through areas where stars had been moved from their original positions, and space itself showed scars that would never heal. The surveys she conducted helped identify potential weak points in reality that required monitoring. Years passed, and the galaxy adapted to its new reality. Humans took their place as protectors of the dimensional barriers that kept existence safe from entities that wanted to unmake everything. Their primitive technology became the foundation for defense systems that spanned entire star clusters. But in the depths of the dimensional prison, Kim continued his eternal vigil. He had become something beyond human understanding while retaining enough of his original personality to care about the lives he protected. His consciousness expanded across multiple dimensions as he monitored quantum locks that kept the most dangerous enemies the galaxy had ever known safely contained. The human engineer had found a way to maintain his essential humanity despite the gradual transformation his duty required. He remembered his friends on the Persistence and the moment they had broken through the Great Barrier.